Welcome back, everybody, to episode 13 of the Arch City Poker Podcast. My name is Tony, alongside Nick. Nick, how are we doing today?
Doing good. Think we are discussing a pretty commonly requested topic, if you will, in small pairs, kind of middling pairs. I think this is definitely going to be an episode that is going to resonate with a lot of you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna be talking today about playing small pocket pairs. I think that's a common issue or leak that a lot of players have in their games, and we're going to help unmuddy the waters. We're going to help highlight some value and some strategic pointers that we think would be beneficial to your game. If you didn't catch last week's episode, we talked about how to play draws, and I think that's also a really common area of concern in a lot of players' game, trying to figure out if what their decision is profitable or not, and if they're making good decisions based on XYZ information. And we just, again, we try to help provide some clarity. We help provide a pathway, a yellow brick road, so to speak, to help people stay on the right path. And we all hope that everybody stayed safe and indoors, no accidents if your area was covered in snow. And if you're a first-time listener, head on over to archcitypoker.com, where we have tons of no-limit Texas Hold'em and pot limit Omaha content for you to consume. We have a custom-built learning management system that houses all of our videos, that gives you a unique player profile, lets you curate your own learning library, kind of save all the videos and organize them as you see fit. And Nick, we're going to dive into how to play small pocket pairs. And to help set the groundwork for the discussion we're going to have, we want to figure out, what are we categorizing as small pocket pairs? And if we were to think of ourselves around a table, from early position to middle position to late position, the button and the blinds, if we were the pre-flop aggressor, what types of hands are we opening? And then what factors help influence if we can open or not open a hand? So what are we considering small pocket pairs? And then if we went around the seating order, kind of which hands are we playing, when, and why?
I would say sixes to deuces is what I would consider small pocket pairs. As far as where and when we play them, it kind of depends. Like, rake is going to be the first thing you have to take into consideration. Stack sizes will be a kind of like a 1B, if you will, on that kind of like, do I play these or not chart, or decision-making chart, if you will. But I mean, if rake's really high, it probably doesn't pay to play these pairs until you're definitely in later position. And then add on top of that, like I said, stacks need to be deep enough. Like, generally, we would want at least 100 bigs behind. If we're opening with one of these hands and we think we are going to get action, if you guys are in a situation where you think it's profitable to call, and hopefully you're in position, and hopefully it's not a high rate game, then just remember, general rule of thumb, you probably need about 15 to 1 on your implied odds. As far as if like somebody raises $10 pre-flop, you want them to have at least $150 behind. And yes, in a 1-2 or 1-3 game, that's not even really that close to 100 bigs, but that's the general rule of thumb. When you're in doubt, though, you want to be in position. You want to be in a game that's not heavily raked, and you want stacks to be deeper. Also, take into consideration something that's, I think, important as well, is how aggressive is the table behind you. If you're going to get 3-bet a lot, then you don't want to open those pairs quite as often. But if you're opening and you're deep enough and you get 3-bet, then those are the kind of hands that you definitely still want to be involved with, because they can win stacks. There's still a good amount of implied odds with those hands. But you also need to keep in mind that one of the biggest mistakes I see with that is a lot of you guys are, I think, calling out of position with too many of these pairs, just trying to only set mine. And if you're doing that, especially in 3-bet pots, that's not profitable. You need to feel really comfortable with your post-flop skills, that you're able to actually win some pots by stealing, or being able to understand that you have some showdown value, mainly when you're heads up with these. But yeah, Tony, I think six through deuces, stack sizes need to be deep. we want to have position. And if we're in a high raked environment, we can't play these combos as much. But if we're in an environment where rake isn't a problem, then you can definitely start to open up your game a little bit.
Yeah, you hit a lot of really good points on the head, and I'll kind of elaborate just a little bit as to kind of if I were to imagine a live low stakes player who does or doesn't know how many leaks that they have in their game, but they're trying to get better and they're watching Arch City Poker videos and they're like, yeah, I'm trying to take stuff away from this video to add to my game. I would say that if your table is a type of table where all the stacks are pretty deep for the most part, and maybe you're deep stacked yourself, I think position is one of the most important things you're going to want to like really work on outside of stack size. And traditionally, I would say if you're not finding that you have, like you kind of need to have a period of self-reflection and kind of evaluate your post-flop skills. And if you don't have very strong post-flop skills, opening small pocket pairs out of position are going to get you into a lot of tricky situations where if you don't know how to navigate them, I think it's just a recipe for disaster. So you just need to have a little bit of self-reflection. And if it's not quite as strong and you want to make life a little easier on yourself, I'd say you would want to start opening small pockets from like middle to late position, certainly on the button against a bunch of limpers, that kind of thing. And you might say, well, I see XYZ person, or I see people open these hands all the time from early position. And those players may or may not really know what they're doing. Or you might find there might be somebody who's particularly skilled and they open fives from under the gun. They might have a pretty good knowledge as to what they're trying to accomplish with their hand. They might have a pretty good idea of how the table is going to react to what they're doing. So they're not so much setting themselves up for failure. So yeah, Nick, I think you had a lot of really good points there. So if we were to be involved in a hand and somebody opened up ahead of us and we're playing in a 1-2, a 1-3 game, and they opened at $10, they opened to 15, whatever the standard raise size for that game would be. And it is now on us to decide if we're going to call, if we're going to raise, if we're going to fold. It's kind of like the first question, but when there's pre-flop action in front of us, how should we react with deuces through sixes? And like some of the considerations we make as to, well, maybe we know calling isn't good, or maybe we think folding is a little bit too passive. How do we navigate those waters?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it ties back into question one a little bit, but I mean, I would say when in doubt, we're probably just folding. It depends again. Like if you're in a high rake environment, you're just folding. Because we're pretty much operating under three better fold in that instance. The only position on the table that there's two spots that you can get away with some calls in the high rate games with sixes through deuces, as long as the pre-flop aggressor stack is deep enough. And that's going to be the button. And then if you're closing the action in the big blind. Otherwise, you're going to be punished so severely in the small to medium size pots by rake that it does not pay to play these combos. You do not flop sets often enough to justify getting raked as severely as you will. You're not going to have enough showdown value in these multi-way or these highly contested multi-way pots, which is what you end up putting yourself in. Like, let's say Tony or I open from under the gun and you have pocket sixes in middle position, you call. You're really just now inviting in, or refer to it almost like as like the waterfall or the call train. Like you're just inviting in all these other people to play now. And yes, you could argue that your small pocket pairs, along with like your suited connectors or whatever, like they do well in multi-way pots. But again, guys, this is operating under the assumption that you're not in that high or severely of a raked game. If you're in a high raked game, though, it doesn't matter. Like you can't be in these small to medium sized pots all the time. So I would say, Tony, mostly fold. Now, there are exceptions to the rule. We've always said, I've said it on many episodes now, that we don't need to be so rigid. You just need to use common sense, to use your brain a little bit. If somebody, let's say you're 400 bigs deep with a player under the gun, and you don't think three betting pocket fours from under the gun +1 is going to work out very well, but the rest of the table behind you has only 3-bet like nits would. Like they've only 3-bet like maybe 4% of the time or less than that. And you have a player that you know is going to maybe overvalue something stronger in that really tight range, like whether it is an overpair or whether they do flop a big one pair hand. If there are 300 to 400 bigs at stake and you think there's a good chance that player is going to put a lot of money in the pot with one pair, then of course that's a scenario where I would say, okay, like rake be damned, let's probably get in there. It's probably going to be a little bit better than folding, of course. But you guys are going to overestimate your implied odds. You're going to underestimate how severe the rake is in these games. I would say mostly folding those sixes through deuces, Tony, if we do face a raise in front of us. And of course, raise size matters. Like if somebody makes it 7x in a 1-3 or a 2-5 game, that obviously takes away a little bit of the implied odds, your positional advantage you might have. Like it makes it a little bit tougher or not as, I guess, as profitable to play those small pairs. But, if somebody min clicks it, it's 1-3 and they make it $6, then again, might be another scenario where there might be a little bit more room to call. But in that sense, guys, like I just would lean towards 3-bet if I was going to do anything and still mostly fold. So yeah, these combos, guys, are just, I think played way too often in high rake games. If you're in a game that's not raked at all, if it's time rake, if it's a home game, if it's a game in a club where it's hourly and it's not even close to being as bad as being pot raked like in a casino, then there's obviously more room to play these combos. Just keep in mind what we said from answer or / question 1. Stack sizes, position, what type of player opened the hand to begin with. Is he somebody that can carry or is he somebody that can take like one pair and put money in the pot and actually play some poker? Or is it somebody that's just not going to put a lot of the money in the pot unless they have it? Then it's not worth playing these little pairs. So just keep those things in mind, guys.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the good point. The number one enemy that we have, at least in a casino, in a game that actually has a drop rake, is the rake. That's worse than any other villain at the table. And Nick, when you're talking about the rake and why it's the biggest enemy, what would be an easy way to explain to somebody who really doesn't pay attention to the rake? Because in an hourly game, you can usually buy your time before you even sit down, and they'll let you know if your time's up, if you need to add on. And in a local casino, you just sit down with your money and you just start playing. And you see the dealer take the chips and maybe do a drop, and you don't really pay much mind to it. They might grab a $5 chip out of a bigger pot and drop it. They might grab a couple whites, couple ones, and drop them. But Nick, how does that kind of add up? Well, how should we be thinking about the rake when we say rake is the enemy? How should a player unfamiliar with like what the rake is think about the rake?
You guys don't want to know the numbers on it. It's like it is. It can be catastrophic to your win rate. Like you really, like Tony can say he'll agree with me that if I could VPIP like 80% of hands against the players that I play against, then I would do it. I've done it before in doses where we're kind of experimenting with strategic stuff to see if rake doesn't matter. Like, can we overcome the rake? Can we create enough big pots to overcome that? And, as good as I believe I am, or as good as I believe an elite no limit player, a world-class player could sit down in these games and outplay these guys, high rake in the live low stakes games makes it incredibly hard to win at the end of the day. Like most rooms are taking up to 10% or $6. If they have a promo fund, which a lot do, then they'll take $1 to $2 there. Really, guys, like you don't need to worry. We don't need to worry about the specific math with this, Tony. I think what I would like you guys listening and watching to understand is that you want to probably shoot for, I would say, $60 pots early on, like $60+ pots as often as you can. That's why I emphasize that. Let's say somebody that is not opening like a complete nit, and that's most players. Like I think there's too much. I think when somebody says like a nit, they think like they're just opening like aces or kings. That's like their 3-bet range. Like even the tight guys are opening hands like king jack or like pocket sevens. If somebody opens from middle position or even early position, and we think they're a little bit looser, and we have a hand like sixes on the button, a lot of your standard just autopilot play is just a call there. Like you're like, yep, it's small pair. It's a hand I can play in position. It's a hand that I can try to hit a set with. Like, you're thinking about it again, going back to the last episode, too much like a slot machine. And what ends up happening is, like, let's say you called the $10 or $12 raise in the 1-3 game. Right there, you have basically a $25 to $30 pot, and the smaller these pots start out, the more rake eats into them. So I would prefer against that $10 or $12 raise that we either fold, or again, if we think that our post flop skills are superior, if we think that our opponent's range is loose enough, if we think we're also deep enough to where we're incentivized to 3-bet more already, but we can now use our skill level over multiple streets. We have more flexibility due to our stack depth with a speculative hand like sixes through deuces. Then we can 3-bet and we can get that pot bloated as early as possible, hit that rake cap as early as possible, because once we get past that cap, which is generally somewhere around $60 these days, then every dollar that goes into the pot after that is up for grabs. The house cannot get that anymore. So we need to try to build these pots and play big pot poker. And a lot of times, sixes through deuces are not going to be the hands that fit that criteria. Like, it's going to be more a hand like king, queen, or a hand like pocket nines. Like, so that's why we want you guys to lean more towards, even being in position, we want to lean more towards like the big Broadway cards, the bigger pairs, and not saying play like a nit. Like, there obviously is room to play the small pairs, the suited stuff. If we get, a couple limpers, and I think that we're deep and they're horrible, Tony's seen it. Like, he's done it himself. Like, we'll have hands like 10-4 suited or queen 3 suited, but that's rarer. It's if we're deeper. It's if we feel we can overcome rake in that spot, and it's still going to be profitable. We're building up these bigger pots with these bigger raise sizes. So yeah, guys, I think that rake is something that a lot of you don't think about. It's something that, candidly, I think some of you know about, but you just don't care. And if you're one of those people and you just want to play hands and you just want to have fun, by all means. Tony and I are never going to sit here and tell you guys, like, you really need to worry about the rake and you need to get in there and try to win, or, make your win rate as good as it is, or as good as it can be. Like, if you guys are just there to have fun and you don't care about wins or losses, then this might honestly not be the podcast for you. But if you do want to be better and you want to win more, and you're starting out in the games that we specialize in, and we specialize instructing and coaching in, that's 1-3, 2-5, getting you guys to graduate to 5-10, where you usually do have time rake, then you need to adhere to the rake, and you need to understand how much it truly cuts into your win rate. So if you're in a drop game, like Tony said, where they're dropping and it's a pot rake structure, then you need to keep that in mind. Now, again, if you are not in that and you're in an hourly rake game, or if you're in a home game and there is no rake, then that's a lot different, and you can really start to open things up. There's more room, like, where calling and passive action isn't punished as often as it would be, or as severely as it is in a pot rake game. But yeah, Tony, rake is definitely our number one enemy, and if it's there, you guys need to pay attention to it, and the best way we can combat it is playing a little bit tighter, but also getting rid, honestly, of a lot of the speculative stuff, unless, as we pointed out before, there are great reasons to get involved, and that usually will involve really deep stacks and position.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. Every time the dealer, whomever, grabs the money out of the pot and they drop it, I'm like, that's income that we lost. Especially if, especially if your head's up and your likelihood of the pot having 1, 2, 3 streets worth of value is diminished. You're like, ugh. It might be 10, It might be 8%, 10% of every single hand. You did say something that I think we've harped on a whole bunch, which is aggression is the way to go forward. I know for myself, if I'm coming to a decision where calling feels better than folding, but there's a real opportunity to 3-bet, I do like to be a little bit more aggressive with my pocket pairs. I kind of play a 3-bet or fold strategy with them, because I think cold calling is just setting us up for failure. It's kind of handcuffing us post flop. It caps our range a little bit, right? Because aces, kings, queens, ace, king, ace, all that stuff is not going to be calling a $10 open, let's pretend. And Nick, if we're to kind of take the next step, I think when people think of small pocket pairs, they think about set mining. I think that is the most common trope in live low stakes poker. I see it in the 2-5 games. I see it in 5-10. I see it all the time, everywhere, in every room I've ever been at. People are just trying to set mine. They don't get aggressive with their small pocket pairs. And if they do, for whatever reason, they like to show it. To see like, oh, look how loose I am. And you're like, okay, like good. Shouldn't have done that. All right.
Right.
So if we have 2s through 6s and we're like, well, the person who opened were really deep and I'm trying to, well, not even that villain. Let's just say if we're trying to figure out if it's set mining's worth it. Again, we've hit on these same topics, whether it's position or stack size. But if our only goal is to set mine, like we don't think that 3-betting is going to be the move that we do. We think cold calling for whatever reason is the preferred method. If you have like a checkbox that has to like be checked for a few different things in order for you to cold call and think set mining is profitable, can you just reiterate kind of what those are for our listeners?
Yeah, like I said, guys, I think make sure that the implied odds of set mining are going to be pretty much directly tied to the pre-flop aggressor and not like, so let's say like Tony opens under the gun and he only had, like, let's say it's a 1-3 game and for some reason he has like $90 in front of him and I would call him a fish for that. Then, let's say he opens though and then 2 players call in middle position with, let's say, $600 behind and we hero have 600 on the button. It doesn't matter how deep those guys are. Your implied odds are almost always pretty much directly tied to the pre-flop aggressor. I'm not saying that you can't stack other callers in the hand, but what ends up happening is a lot of like the callers, especially in the live low stakes games, they have a lot of speculative stuff, a lot of suited stuff, a lot of pairs. And so the hands that you're going to stack when you're set mining are often going to be like the big 1-pair hands, the over pairs. And those are going to come from obviously the player that's probably the pre-flop aggressor, the uncapped range. So the player that is the pre-flop aggressor, you would like, again, to have at least have 15-1 after like his pre-flop raise. So if he makes it 10, you'd want there to theoretically be like at least 150 behind. I've always said, guys, like if you're ever in doubt, you probably want them to have like at least 100 bigs to make it worthwhile, especially with rake. So like if it is 1-3, like I'm looking for players that have at least $300 in their stack. If it's a 2-5 game, I'm looking for at least 500. I think like another little checkbox is just making sure that this pot is going to be large enough early enough to make it worthwhile. And so let's say again, Tony opens from under the gun and 3 or 4 players call a $15 open and we're now in the big blind closing the action. And we've talked about this where it's, I don't want you guys to get yourselves into such like a rigid way or line of thinking where it's like, well, Tony and Nick said we need a 3-better fold. Like I'm not going to call in the spot, but this feels like a pretty thin spot to like go for a huge squeeze. No, guys, like I said, make sure that you understand, like there are 2 spots on the table that I think you can probably just call and then have in mind that you could be doing a little set money. And that is if you're going to see probably like a larger multi-way pot and you either have absolute position on the button or you're closing the action in the big blind. So if Tony opens under the gun, 3 players call in position on him, and I'm in the big blind closing the action with pocket 4s, as long as Tony is not really that short stacked, we can make a profitable call there and overcome rake because the pot is going to be around $60 to begin with, and his stack is going to have enough left behind that it makes it worthwhile to in fact set mine. Like I said, you could do that on the button a little bit. I think there is some room for that, but it would again have to be a similar scenario where somebody opened under the gun, there's multiple callers, the pot's already probably going to be big enough, the pre-flop aggressor isn't short stacked, we can now probably call on the button. Now, you guys, you might be missing a nice squeeze spot. I'll just let you know that. Whether you are in the button or in the big blind, you'd be surprised at how often those do get through with really large squeezes. But if you think that's going to be not quite the best option, you think folding is just missing out on a bigger opportunity there, then sure, we can go ahead and call. And that, again, guys, is if it is in a higher rake environment. Now, if it's in an environment where rake is just not really as much of a factor, then again, there is more room to do a little bit more calling. You don't have to probably be quite on just the button or the big blind, but I would say really for me, it would just expand out to maybe just the cutoff. Maybe some in the small blind if the raise size is small enough. But again, guys, like you're starting to kind of get into or get onto like a slippery slope there with that. And you don't want to find yourself just like, well, we're deep enough and rake's not a thing, so I can just all 100% of the time with all these pairs. Like, keep in mind what kind of game you're in. If there's any inclination or you see anybody that's squeezing a lot, there's a lot of aggressive three betting. I was in a 2-5 game this last weekend where it was rarer because it was in the day, but it was aggressive. I mean, there's a lot of three betting and four betting. And so I knew after only 3 orbits that I can't open hands like 2s through 6s in earlier position. I need some stuff to get some board coverage against guys like that. Like, I was going to make sure I still had like a 6-5 suited in there, or I do mix in like pocket 7s could have been the threshold. But yeah, you got to steer away from, again, a lot of those small pairs. If the table is overly aggressive pre-flop and there aren't a lot of profitable spots to play them from just due to really rake.
Yeah, I mean, I've played in games like that too, where what we're utilizing, like our hand ranges are going to be different depending on who the villain set is, what the table action's like. It can get a little bit complicated, and you might find yourself adopting an entirely new strategy if your table is incredibly tight, if they're incredibly loose. If we were to look back and say, like, what is our bread and butter strategy for playing like small pocket pairs? It's not going to be opening these hands from early position just because, like, maybe you're at a 1-2 game and you're like, well, I'm certainly better than these guys. I can beat, like, that might be true, but there's better hands to do it with than small pocket pairs. If you're going to open them, again, you want to probably have position. And the thing that Nick said that really hit home is, if there is preflop action ahead of you and there are multiple callers, we're comparing our decision to whoever the preflop aggressor is, not all the people who are calling. Because what's happening is their decision, whether they 3-bet, whether they cold call, whether they fold, it's all predicated on that preflop aggressor. So if we are to make our implied odds decision, our set mining decision, our cold calling, our 3-betting, our whatever the case is, it's based off of that main villain. Because if we're trying to react to what all the stack sizes are in between, you're just naturally going to know that the game just traditionally has like a flow to it, right? The preflop aggressor traditionally goes first, and everybody else gets to decide what they're going to do after that, or everybody's going to check right to them. If you're trying to set mine because of all these deep stacks that are in the middle, just like Nick said, they're probably cold calling with a variety of hands that are geared towards that specific villain. Like, maybe they have 7-8 suited. Maybe they have the same hand you have. Maybe you have 5s and they have 5s. Maybe they have 6s. It can just complicate the situation. And the reason we like to be aggressive is we like to unmuddy the waters. Like, when there's an open under the gun to $15 and there's 3 callers to us on the button with 5s, I love making a pretty big raise because it's going to put a ton of pressure on the preflop aggressor because he's got 3 people to act after him. The 3 people who called that under the gun open probably called that under the gun open with speculative hands, and we're just kind of getting rid of all the riffraff. And we can take down a $50 pot and have no rake, and we just get a rake-free pot that goes right into our stack. So, Nick, I think you just nailed it. Just another reason why position matters, and another reason why stack size matters. And it's not just who's calling, it's that preflop aggressor. And I think this is a perfect segue into the next big question, which is, from your experience at the live low stakes tables, what are the biggest leaks or mistakes or misplays that you see the player populations have with small pocket pairs?
Oh boy, yeah, I would say the 2 that stick out immediately are open limping or over limping these hands, just because, like, I think players think they're, I want to see a cheap flop with them. They're not strong enough to raise. Well, guys, that makes you really predictable, and you play right into, again, like the rake's hands. Like, small pots just kill your win rate just due to rake. So playing them too often, too passively, cold calling, just too large of raise sizes with just not a profitable enough scenario that you're setting yourself up for. So, like, kind of everything we've talked about up to this point, guys, like, avoid limping them, but also, let's say I open under the gun and you guys are under the gun +1 with pocket 5s. I would say, man, like, out of 10 players, 9 to probably 10 are calling with that hand in that spot. And it's just, again, it's playing in a rake. It's playing without position because there's a really good chance that you don't end up in position. So you're playing what I would call kind of like, it's set mind, like a set or jet game. And if there's no rake, that there's a place for that if you're like definitely deep enough. But if you're not skilled enough to outplay somebody to win the pot when you don't hit a set, and again, if there's rake, I know we keep hammering that home, guys, but it's very important you understand that. Then that's going to be a problem. So those are the two main ones, Tony. It's just, and they kind of blend together. It's really just playing them too often and too passively.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think people they limp too often. I see people limp more often when there's also a promotion in the room attached to a high hand.
Yeah.
I see that a lot in the room. In the room that I play in, they often have $300 an hour, maybe $300 every half an hour, and that just entices a lot of people to just try to bank sets and fly and turn boats and turn quads, and it's just it's not smart. So, and you're right in that they're just calling too much preflop, and I don't know if the thinking is like if there's an open from under the gun to $15 and you have fives next act under the gun +1 and you call the 15 with fives. I would imagine the thinking is like, well, under the gun +1 could have ace king and fives is ahead of that. So we're ahead right now. So we're going to call. And that might be correct, but it's just not strategic. It's not a sound play moving forward because any competent player is going to recognize fairly quickly when you've banked a set with your fives and all of a sudden you're going to be raising. It really gets really hard to mask what your hand is. And I think you just do a much better job if you stick to later position, if you just stick to the fundamentals, deep stack, avoiding the rake, try not to cold call, squeezing more, 3-betting more with those small pocket pairs. But ultimate position is going to be your best friend. And then if you are closing the action, the big blind, I mean, I've done that several times too, where it just made a lot of sense. You don't have to worry about any aggression after your decision. So Nick, if we were to think about our small pocket pairs, and we're going to actually go past the flop on this one, let's pretend we were the pre-flop aggressor with our small pocket pair. And we either got a caller, 2 callers. Let's pretend we opened, let's say, the hijack with pocket sixes to 15, and the button and the big blind both call. So we're going to go 3 ways to a flop, and we have pocket sixes, and the flop is 3, 5, 8, maybe rainbow, let's say. How should we be thinking about our hand that on low boards might be just a little bit stronger, but generically speaking is still a middling hand on a low board? And if we were to kind of elevate the thought train on this, and we can kind of get into it if you want to, but how should we treat our hand versus like maybe what our range is or maybe how we're ranging our opponents?
You said we're in position in this scenario?
In this one, we would be second to act. So it would be the button and the big blind are in the hand with us. So big blind would probably check to us, which would be in flow. Our decision on 3, 5, 8 with pocket sixes with the button left to act after us.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would just go back to kind of what we said, a bread and butter thing we like to do in these spots is, the question I asked myself right away is, do I think that there's going to be a bet behind me based on texture? And that texture is, what did we say? It was 8-3 or 8-5-3,
yes.
Johnny?
Yep.
Was that right?
Yep, 3, 5, 8 rainbow, and we got sixes.
Yeah, so definitely, even with it being rainbow, consider that more dynamic. There's just so many overcards that can come that can bring in better top pair, better 2 pairs, better sets, etc. There's also multiple straight draws that are available on that board. So I would consider that board, those lighter boards, to be a little bit more dynamic. And when that's the case, I think that you're going to see definitely more stabs or more bets from players in position. So I would just start with a check with everything there. And the way I would think about sixes in that spot is that again, we want to go back to there's basically 3 kind of buckets we put our hands into if we are going to start to think about what kind of hand we have. Because first and foremost, guys, you just want to try to range your opponents as quickly as possible. And, we can do that by, like we said, we do a lot of checking from out of position. We bet from out of position if we think they're going to be too passive when they're in position versus us. If we're in position, we like to do a lot of betting with everything for smaller. Just we like to gain as much info out of our opponent from that, and they're usually pretty truthful with that. So I don't like to really honestly in these games think too hard about my specific combo. I like to think about where I think my opponents are at first, but there is something to be said about understanding what kind of bucket your hand's in. And, the top bucket would be like your obvious value or like your nutty hands, your good value hands, or sixes really value on this board. It's more like thin value, might have a little bit of showdown value, but especially heads up. This is another point that needs to be made is that, again, guys, when you're multi-way and you have these little pairs, they, like Tony kind of mentioned before, it's like, oh, well, fives are technically like a percentage point or two maybe ahead of ace king in some scenarios depending on what cards are still left. We don't know that for sure, right? It's all random besides what we know about our hand and what's on the board. But you guys that are coming from like tournament poker or understanding what the equity of two starting hands against each other are, that those are heads up scenarios. Like imagine how often you guys end up in this spot where you're sandwiched in between two players with pairs sixes through deuces. How often are you getting to the river feeling comfortable with your pocket pair? Like they just don't have the showdown value that you guys think they do. And you're not flopping sets often enough. And when you do, you're not winning large enough pots often enough to justify playing them. So that's just kind of a little like, we're going to keep hammering this home that you guys understand these combos are pretty overrated for the most part. But in this scenario, let's say that I kind of consider this more like the second bucket. Like it's not the third bucket where it's complete air or it's like a bluffing candidate, not yet at least. But this would be more like the second bucket. Is it possibly the best hand amongst two players on this on 8-5-3? Yeah, there's a really good chance of that. If I felt the player on the button was overly passive, this is actually a good spot to bet, guys. Like I would bet because he's going to act, there's going to be leverage there. Like he's going to act a little bit more straightforward based on the fact that the big blind's still in the hand and still uncapped. So that's why multi-way with an uncapped player, we don't want to probably bet too large at that point. I think anywhere from, you could go 40% pot is a pretty good number there. You could bet. They're going to tell you pretty much exactly where they're at for the most part. I understand it's rainbow. Yes, there could be some slow plays, but generally multi-way on a board that is still technically dynamic, in my opinion, you're going to get some pretty straightforward play. And it's a good way to get a little thin value, possibly take down the pot there. You're also going to find out a good amount about your opponent's ranges. So let's make this very clear. This is not a bet just to see where you're at. I can't tell you guys how dumb of a statement that is. And it's one of the worst ones I've heard in my career for as many years as I've been involved in this industry now. Betting or raising to see where you're at is an incredibly stupid thing to do because anybody that's good is going to pick up on that immediately and they're going to tell you lies all day long about where you're at. So this is not the bet to see where we're at. It's a nice little byproduct of us betting to mainly get thin value. When we bet, we might get the button to actually fold more than what he would heads up because he still has to worry about the big blind. So there's kind of a little bit more of a complex scenario going on here, Tony, as we can see.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say if we're in doubt, our bread and butter would be to check and then evaluate what the button does. And it's important to understand that the big blind is still uncapped in this point, but we're going to find out a lot about the button. If he does not bet here, then we feel much more comfortable about our sixes moving forward versus likely just the big blinds range now is what we need to figure out on the turn. And yes, there are going to be a ton of turns that come that are a little more dynamic in nature. It's going to be another overcard to the board. It's going to be, honestly, guys, tricky to navigate these small pairs at that point. And so we just need to quickly figure out where our opponent and or like opponents are in their ranges as quickly as we can. And once we do that, then we can figure out with our hand, if it is sixes or whatever, what kind of showdown value we actually have. And if we have an opportunity to maybe turn that showdown value into a bluff. Because what I end up doing in these spots is if I do get multiple callers and I have a really good reason to believe turn and or river that my opponents are pretty weak, they're capped, I'm not looking to just show these little pairs down and hope that I'm good just some of the time, because you'll be good like some of the time, but not as often as you need to be to make this a profitable scenario. So I look to bluff as often as I can. And are pocket pairs good bluffing candidates in a vacuum? They're not the greatest because you only have usually the two outs. They don't block a whole lot. It's getting a little in the weeds or overly complex for, the kind of games we're talking about, guys. But really, like, let's just dumb it down to I figure out where my opponent or opponents are as quickly as I can. If I think they're really weak and I think I don't have showdown value, then I don't really care what I have. I'm just going to bluff those spots relentlessly. If I think I have showdown value and I end up getting heads up to the river and I have a spot where maybe I have a little showdown value, maybe I have a spot for slightly thin value based on how the board runs out. We just need to read the situation, understand what our opponent's actions mean, and range them accordingly, and then go back to our hand. We don't want to think about what we're going to do with sixes first and where we're at in our range and all that garbage with our own hand or whatever. Like, we just need to figure out where our opponents are as quickly as we can, and then we'll take it from there.
Man, preach. Some really great information there. Playing small pocket pairs is more or less straightforward. You're just not going to be playing them very often unless the situation very clearly presents itself. People are deeper stacked. We're recommending about $150 at least within their stack sizes at 1, 2, 1, 3. And then you just increase that dramatically for the different stakes that you're playing in. But yeah, most of the time...
Yeah, Tony, I would say, I don't want to cut you off. I want to reiterate and make it very clear on that point that the 150 would be like, I mentioned that number specifically, like, because I think I had an example where it was like a $10 raise, right, guys? Whether it's 1, 2, or 1, 3, and there's 15 to 1 set mining odds. But we need to understand, and I want to relay this like as a practical example for you guys, so you understand that. Let's say you flop a set 1 out of 9 times, and the 15 to 1 kind of makes up a little bit for the fact that, maybe that one time you do flop it, you're not like winning a huge pot there. But the live low stakes players are so passive a lot of the time that you could flop a set 4 to 5 times in a row and you're not playing a big pot in any of those situations. Like, they're just not, like, you're the one that's having to build the pot. But if they're the early aggressor and then it flips and you're putting money in, they're not really usually that interested in piling money in. So I want you guys to understand that, yes, technically set mining is going to be argued to be profitable anywhere from 12 to 15 to 1. But I would say that Tony would probably agree with this, that if you're in doubt about the specific aggressor in the hand, if you don't think he's willing to play ball often enough, and by play ball I mean play for stacks, like often enough with less than just the nuts, if you just kind of unsure about how profitable the scenario is, make sure that you guys have 100 bigs deep effective at least. I don't care about the 15 to 1 rule as it stands now. If you've got more money from other callers getting involved, like we said, or if that player is somebody that is more aggressive or they're willing to stack off with one pair, then that 15 to 1 rule comes more into play. And, if they are raising larger in a 1-3 or 2-5 game, then that 15 to 1, you're going to have at least 100 bigs, at least anyway. So it might not matter much, guys. But I just wanted to make it very clear that, like, even though it might be profitable technically, to go after somebody with just the 75 bigs or whatever in that scenario, like, we just, in a vacuum, we want to be at least probably 100 bigs deep in the high rake environments for sure.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think I just said $150 just because I think that was the number that we were just kind of batting around in the examples. I think for me in my game, I just think on the fly, just 75 bigs at least before I even start to consider what I'm going to be doing. And then if you're just a live low stakes player and you're just trying to figure it out, just to big stacks. Just if they have 50 bucks, if you're playing 1, 2, 1, 3, they have $50, $75. It's just not worth it. You're going to get eaten alive by the rake. It's just not a very profitable play. It's not plus EV, right? Plus, good value for your hand. But Nick, as we just kind of wrap up here, that's going to cover small pocket pairs. We are going to start to migrate into middle pocket pairs and large pocket pairs. I think we're going to see how we're acting in both pre-flop and post-flop scenarios really start to put more of our tools in our tool belt to use. Small pocket pairs for the general audience, you're just looking at position, you're looking at stack depth, you're trying to evaluate if it's what the rake is. and more often than not, you would want to take more an aggressive route versus a passive route. But for the most part, guys, try to just stay around the button and the big blind when you're going to be playing these cards if when in doubt. And otherwise, Nick, do you have any parting wisdom for our listeners?
I don't think so. I think we covered that topic as thoroughly as we can.
Yeah, awesome. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap up episode 13 of the Arch City Poker Podcast. Again, if you're brand new, head on over to archcitypoker.com. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. We're going to be back next week with another wonderful episode, and stay safe out there if you're in an area that has cold weather and lots of snow. Otherwise, everybody, have a fantastic rest of your day.